Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and also good afternoon, depending on where you might be joining us from. And a very, very warm welcome to the 2024 spring meetings of the World Bank Group and the IMF. My name is Nozipho Shabalala, and it is an absolute privilege to be serving you today as the moderator of this all-important conversation. This conversation that we're going to be holding over 90 minutes is an invitation for us to begin to address the investment gaps that would allow us to have water security and to be increasingly climate resilient. The session is co-hosted by the Managing Director of the IFC, the Vice President of the World Bank Group, and of course, the Regional Vice President of the World Bank for South Asia. In this 90 minutes, we are going to try and do a couple of very important things, all under significant time constraints. We're going to have two panel discussions. The first panel discussion that is going to be aimed at looking at water solutions for climate resilience. We want to ask the question, what works? What are the lessons that we're learning along the way? And how do we extrapolate those lessons and scale? The second conversation is going to be looking at innovative water financing solutions. And we really want to focus on those solutions that enable us to engage collaboratively and with a transformative and transformational impact. And my panelists are both in the room with us here, and some of them are going to be joining us online. You might have noticed that you've got some headsets on your seats. We do have English on channel 1 and French on channel 2 for ease of following the conversation. In addition to the panel discussions, we're going to start off with a short but powerful keynote address by Nobel laureate Professor Michael Kramer, who's joined us. And we're going to seal it off with some reflective remarks from, of course, Sir Nick Stern, who I've had the privilege of sitting next to him this morning. And he says, I know what my job is just to listen and sense make for all of us. So thank you very much, sir. We do look forward to that. But to get us started and to extend the official opening remarks, it's my pleasure to welcome Senior Managing Director looking after development policy and partnerships at the World Bank. Please help me welcome Mr. Alex van Trotsenberg. Let's give him a round of applause.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. Let me also warmly welcome Professor Kramer, but also Nick, and I have to give a big shout out. You know, Nick is the biggest champion of climate change. He doesn't know barrier. You fly everywhere. And I think thanks to you, you have been really good to keep us on our toes, but also continue to focus on climate change. It's not always easy, but so a huge thank you. But also in general, thank you for joining here today. This is an important topic. We are facing, of course, a huge gap in the SDGs, but we have also, of course, unfortunately, a huge investment gap in achieving water security and contributing to climate resilience. So that is something that is needed to be discussed. And in fact, this crisis, the water crisis, could actually jeopardize economic progress, poverty eradication, and it is also at the very core of sustainable development. And I would actually add, there is also risk for fragility and violence. We should know, we often don't say it. But please consider these dimensions. A tenth of the world's population already lives in a country with high or critical water stress. So we're talking at close to 1 billion people. And by 2040, 1 in 4 children will live in areas with extreme water shortages. In 2019 alone, poor water supply, sanitation, and hygiene contributed more than 4 million deaths and over 200 million disability-adjusted life years. I mean, 4 million deaths, people, that's more than what malaria kills and what AIDS kills together. So keep that in mind. and over 200 million disability-adjusted life years with enduring effects on human capital, labor productivity, income, and job opportunities. Yet globally, the situation is dire, with 3 in 10 people lacking safe drinking water, 6 in 10 lacking sanitation, and 2 billion people relying on health facilities without basic water, sanitation, and hygiene. That's, again, a quarter of the world population. Climate change is modifying the water cycle and amplifying underlying challenges caused by unsustainable water use. Alongside growing populations and competing demands for water, food production, and nutrition are at risk, making climate-resilient irrigation necessary to feed people on a livable planet. In many countries, development has advanced at the cost of water resources, leading to degraded water quality, reduced availability, and threats to biodiversity. A staggering 84% loss of abundance of freshwater species since 1970, in the last 50 years. So there is also increasing water is both a casualty and unfortunately also a weapon of conflict. Along with the energy infrastructure on which it depends, water and sanitation suffer regular and serious damage in today's conflict. Major changes are needed in how water is developed, managed, protected to balance water needs for climate mitigation, adaptation, and sustainability, while ensuring the delivery of inclusive and equitable drinking water and sanitation. So stronger water systems are the bedrock for a way forward. But there are very clear concerns that the existing policy, institution, and regulatory system undervalue water and offer weak incentives for improving efficiency, safeguarding water resources, enabling access to finance. There are significant macro-fiscal implications with increased cost of supplying water, higher debt, and greater cost of doing business. This is also where the public sector comes in, or should come in. The public sector has a lead role to play in water reform with actions that lay the foundations for private sector to come in to support efficiency gains, inject capital, and provide technical expertise and innovation. Because of the magnitude of the water challenge, the ill effects on people, the planet, and prosperity, and an investment gap of about $1 trillion per year, our institution has chosen water security and climate adaptation as one of its global challenges programs. For those who are not at the bank, we are in a huge reform process we call the evolution roadmap. It touches from finance, knowledge, how we do the business. But this is not talk. It is also to translate this into operations at scale. And there we have formulated global challenge programs. We're currently discussing this with the board because we would like to lift that not by a couple of $100 million, but by billions. So that shocks the hell out of them. But basically, what we need to discuss is, can we make a difference? So we have started this discussion in the energy and forestry area, but water is one of the areas as well. And the World Bank Group is the largest single investor in water projects globally. And we are poised to launch even more ambitious and bold water security and access programs through these global challenge programs. So we hope that we can lift that at a very significant level. What I should say is, when we have the plans, we need always to think we cannot do it alone. We have to think in partnerships. Partnerships, of course, first with the governments affected, but then it was the private sector, and then external partners, whether that is bilateral or multilateral, but partnerships is absolutely key. And also in this context, the multilateral development banks come in, where we would like to see how we can together double the number of people benefiting from investments and then reaching at least 160 million people annually. So there is ambition, but we will have to do that only together. And these activities with the MDBs include innovation in irrigation to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and save water without sacrificing rice production, for example, in Vietnam or Indonesia or India. We have many examples, but what I would like to say is here very clearly, what we need to say is how we can get new partnerships. And what we have been learning also in our project, or other projects from other MDBs, is how we work with the private sector that can go from projects in India with the Clean Ganga project, how we can actually have PPPs where you can rope in the private sector. This will be done, and this will be done also as a one World Bank group effort, so that we'll have the public sector part involved, but also our private sector colleagues from IFC and MIGA. It is basically this where we would like to see scale, and this is actually our joint, I think, challenge here when we discuss this. I think we are good at the diagnostic. We know what the problem is, but basically when we are looking at the $1 trillion, how can we approximate it? What can actually the World Bank Group together with other MDBs and the private sector do? So that is basically the challenge ahead of this. I would hope that we can discuss this, because ultimately we have all been too good at discussing. And if we are looking at the SDGs, we can just see that we are way off. And it is all upon us to see how we can translate into workable programs so that we actually can mobilize it. And that is for the middle income countries through our IBRD, but we have also to do that through our support to the low income countries through IDA. And I think that requires ambitious IDA when we're negotiated it, but also we have to find the necessary resources to support the middle income countries as well. So that is the challenge ahead. I hope that we have a good discussion, be as provocative as possible towards the bank and others, because nice talk is wonderful. We can do that outside, but let's also be here hard-nosed that we actually can change something. Otherwise, this discussion is not worth it. We need to actually get together and be super ambitious to get it done. Thanks so much.
Axel, thank you very much for reminding us what is at stake. It's economic progress, it's poverty alleviation, it's fragility and violence. And echoing some of the words we heard from RJ earlier on in the week, that it's enough now. No more admiring the problem. What we need to do is act on the problem. Thank you very much. So we're going to transition very swiftly from Axel as I introduce Professor Michael Kramer, who needs little introduction in this room. Suffice to say that he is, of course, the recipient of the 2019 Nobel Prize for Economics for the work that he's done on innovative experimental approaches to alleviating global poverty. Professor Kramer currently serves as a university professor in economics at the University of Chicago, and his recent work examines education, health, water, and agriculture in developing countries. As Professor Kramer comes up, let me extend yet another invitation for those who are still looking for a seat. There are plenty of seats on this side of the room. Let's give Professor Kramer a round of applause. Thank you so much.
So, esteemed ministers and distinguished guests, water is a source of life and prosperity, vital for human health and for agricultural production. Yet 2.2 billion people worldwide lack access to safely managed drinking water. Falling water tables around the world are a threat to food security, and climate change is exacerbating these problems. Now, investment gaps to foster water security and climate resilience will require addressing a range of multifaceted issues. Just to take a few examples, policy reforms are needed to stimulate private investment in urban water supply in ways that improve access for underserved populations, to reduce incentives for overuse of water in irrigation that leads to aquifer depletion, and to incentivize investment in developing drought, flood, and saline-resistant crops. But today, I'd like to focus on investing in water treatment as a cost-effective approach to improving water and health resilience. Every year, 1.7 billion cases of diarrhea affect children under 5 years old. The burden of collecting water and caring for sick children falls disproportionately on women and girls. Diarrheal disease, as we heard, is a major cause of child mortality and morbidity in low and middle income countries. Microbiological contamination of water through fecal matter is one of the primary drivers of diarrheal illness. This has been exacerbated by climate change. So cyclones, floods, and heavy rain spread pathogens into drinking water supplies, causing disease spikes, as we've seen, for example, with Hurricane Freddie recently, and the resultant cholera outbreaks. Drought can force people to move to less safe water sources, and increased temperatures can accelerate the growth of pathogens in water. So to quantify the impact of this, together with colleagues in epidemiology, biostatistics, and other economists, we recently released a meta-analysis combining 15 randomized controlled trials, each of which on their own would be have insufficient sample size to examine the effect of clean water, of water treatment on child survival. So if you take a look at the result, here you can see the results. Each row is an individual study, and you'll see that the dots to the left of the line represent a reduction in mortality. Dots to the right would represent an increase. The bars are the confidence intervals, and you can see for each individual study, very wide confidence intervals. You need a very large sample size to be able to measure the effects on the rare outcome of child mortality. But when you aggregate the 15 studies together, a very clear picture starts to emerge. And indeed, what we find, if you look down here, the overall estimate is that 1 out of every 4 cases of child mortality could be addressed through the simple expedient of treating water to address microbiological contamination. And you also see, if we just look at the studies that looked at chlorination alone, we get almost an identical estimate. So we weren't surprised to see that treating water would improve child survival. Frankly, we were very surprised by the magnitude of these effects. 1 out of every 4 cases through a very, very inexpensive intervention. Just to give you a sense, and my epidemiologists and MD colleagues are not going to recommend this, but if you have a bottle of bleach that you can buy at a simple bottle of bleach, that has enough chlorine in it to treat 70,000 liters of water. This is not expensive at all. So if you work out the cost per disability adjusted life year averted due to water treatment, you get around $30 to $60 per DALY, per disability adjusted life year averted. That's about 1/45th the widely used threshold of 1 GDP per capita per disability adjusted life year. That puts water treatment really among the most cost-effective health interventions, comparable to childhood vaccinations, for example. Okay, so then we heard we don't want to just talk about the problems, we want to talk about the solutions. So let me talk about 2 different types of solutions that can be appropriate in different contexts. First, where piped water can be available. So an important thing to recognize is that issues with contamination can persist even where there's piped water. If water supply is intermittent, negative pressure in pipes can cause contaminants to leak in, even if the water is originally treated centrally. UNICEF surveys find that in both sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, well over half of piped water sources were contaminated with E. coli. Now, in regions where water is being delivered through pipe systems or storage tanks, there's a very simple and inexpensive solution, which is inline chlorination technologies that can be applied to treat water, even if you can't, in the short run, get to a fully functional centralized system of water treatment that addresses all the leaks and maintains constant pressure flow. In the long run, of course, you want to bring in the private investment so that you can do that, and that should be the ultimate goal. But that won't be feasible immediately in all countries, in all settings. The inline chlorination devices treat the water automatically, so everyone using the source receives safe water. So that can be done in rural areas, in a village system, or can be used as part of an urban system where contamination is a problem. Different countries are each going to find their ways of doing the quite costly but very important investments to achieve this constant pressure, constant access. But in the additional cost of making water safe to drink is very small relative to that cost. So there'll be some mix of public and private solutions for the larger costs, but the additional cost of making this safe is something that might cost about $1 per person per year with inline chlorination. So let me point to a very important policy action that's being taken by the government of India. So the Jal Jeevan mission, under the leadership of Secretary Mahajan, who will be speaking later, aims to bring safe drinking water to every household in rural India through pipe connections by 2024. What they've done is they've integrated inline chlorination into national policy. Now, based on the meta-analysis results that I shared and some Indian data, we estimate that delivering treated drinking water universally in rural India could save 135,000 lives every year. So that's the scale of the impact that can be achieved. And that relatively, the overall program to bring piped water is a massive commitment the government of India made. The additional cost to make that water safe is relatively modest. Okay, but what about areas where it's not feasible for governments to provide piped water, or at least it won't be feasible for some time? Well, to bridge the gap, we need innovative delivery solutions. One way to deliver water treatment at scale is through existing maternal and child health services, which already reach the vast majority of mothers and children, even in low-income countries, even in rural areas of low-income countries where it's probably not going to be feasible to bring piped water in the short run. So clinics already provide a package of essential goods and services. Free water treatment solution could be integrated into that package at a very low cost. In many countries, small bottles of dilute chlorine solution are already socially marketed, and they sell at about 20 or 30 cents for a month's supply. Now, unfortunately, even at that low price, there's typically only single-digit take-up. Usage is very sensitive to price. So a randomized controlled trial I've been involved in found that charging even 10 cents for a month's supply reduced usage by 2/3 relative to free delivery. And that's very similar to other preventive health products, such as vaccines or mosquito nets. So the bank, along with other development actors, has supported countries to implement packages of free preventive health packages for child survival. The same approach can be used for water treatment solution. And indeed, studies in Kenya and Malawi find this is a highly efficient program because it targets those most at risk, pregnant women and children under 5. So it doesn't require new infrastructure staff, making it very cost effective. We estimate costs as low as $27 or per DALI or $2,000 per child death averted. Integrating water treatment into maternal and child health services and leveraging technologies like inline chlorination, we can substantially improve child health. Water treatment has been neglected because it falls at the intersection of two different sectors, health and water. But as climate change increases threats to water safety and health, it's critical that we avoid sectoral siloing and follow the lead of countries like India, which are radically expanding access to water treatment. In some contexts, it's going to be possible to mobilize the financing to build out piped water infrastructure to deliver treated water quickly in the short run, either through centralized water treatment facilities with constant pressurized delivery, or through this lower tech solution of inline chlorination. In others, that's going to be a more distant goal. But in the meantime, ministries of health can provide access to water treatment for mothers and children who are at risk of mortality from waterborne diseases. Both the World Bank and finance ministries have a key role in facilitating cooperation between sectors and ministries, which is part of the reason why I'm so happy to be joining all of you today. I'd be very happy to follow up with anyone who's interested and help connect you with technical experts, either on inline chlorination or in the provision of water treatment through maternal and child health systems. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kramer. As promised, a short but really powerful keynote that really helps us to quantify the impact that we're talking about. One of the numbers that stands out, 135 million lives saved every year, and that's just from one country case study, India. And we're going to unpack that further. Thank you very much, Professor. Ladies and gentlemen, we move now to our first panel. The focus of that panel, of course, being to showcase successful interventions, to ask the question, what works, and of course, to lift up some of the lessons learned. Joining me up on stage now, allow me to kindly please welcome my panelists. Allow me to welcome Minister of Economy from Tunisia, Madame Feriel Ouahi. Let's give her a big round of applause as she comes up. Joining us online in a massive welcome to you, Madam, is the Minister of Energy and Water from Mali, Madam Bintou Kamara. A big welcome to you, Madam. Joining me in the room is the Minister of Water Supply and Estate Infrastructure Development from Sri Lanka, Mr. Jeevan Thondaman. Thank you very much for being here, Minister. Joining me online is the Secretary in the Department of Drinking Water and Sanitation from India, Madam Vini Mahajan. Thank you very much, Madam. And closing off this panel is Madam Maaike van Ginneken, the Special Envoy for Water from the Netherlands. Thank you, Madam, for being here. A very warm welcome, and of course, we're going to have the conversation with our online participants as well. But maybe, Minister Thondaman, if I could maybe just start off with you and allow you to take us to Sri Lanka. How would you describe the biggest challenges that Sri Lanka is facing in the water sector? But more importantly, how are you addressing them given the limited fiscal space?
First of all, good morning to the panelists and all the esteemed guests present here. I think it's no surprise that Sri Lanka has gone through an unprecedented economic crisis from 2022 onwards. And as we have recovered under the guidance of His Excellency, the President Ranil Wickremesinghe, it's also been a learning curve for us.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer in the term adversity creates opportunity. And being the youngest minister in the history of Sri Lanka, I've also had the chance to bring forward reforms which would benefit my generation for years to come. So starting with which, when I had taken over the water ministry, it was an unsustainable, heavily politicized institution, which had heavily undervalued and subsidized water. So given the cards that we had been dealt with, we started identifying the challenges one by one. Now, there, like you said, with limited fiscal space, it was difficult for us to maneuver. And given the situation that was also looming around us, we identified the biggest issue with the water ministry, with the water board as an institution, is that it had lost its credibility. And the only way we can still move forward by providing water to all is through private sector participation. And if we are going to try and provide water through private sector participation, we first need to fix the institution.
Right.
And we started fixing the institution by increasing transparency and accountability. So we had initially started off with the investment framework criteria, which we had formulated within the water board. And this investment framework criteria more or less provided confidence, not just to, well, the public, but also to investors. And we had also started formulating the water tariff formula. But the challenge with coming up with a cost recovery formula is also bureaucratic inefficiencies. Because as far as the bureaucratic inefficiencies go, One of the main factors is the exclusion of the capital component in the cost recovery formula.
Yeah.
And when that is the case, we have come to a standstill. So we are looking at alternative methods, and we are trying to push forward in including CapEx.
Yeah.
Because by including CapEx, we'd also be assuring investors that you would be making, well, to be very fair, to say that water is a profitable field it's quite difficult. But by bringing in public-private partnership,
Yeah.
we would be able to address the urban sector and the commercialized space at least. And other than that, we also had challenges with challenges such as lack of a regulator.
Yeah.
We lacked an independent regulator, and thereby automatically we lost out on monitoring and ensuring standardized practices for water. And given the climate change issue that's ongoing,
Yeah.
we took it upon ourselves in the past 6 months to come up with a climate change resilience roadmap. And that was with assistance from the Asian Development Bank. And moving forward in that, I think we've received cabinet approval for that. And we have managed to bring out the importance of climate change in Sri Lanka. And everyone must recognize the fact that being part of the South Asian region, climate change is virtually non-existent.
Yeah.
And so getting importance and recognition for that was a very big task. And lastly, I would also like to say, in terms of practical solutions, I mean, Axel had mentioned that they've come up with an evolution roadmap.
Yeah.
Where it's more actionable. And I think that's been one of the biggest wants for us as a developing country, because we understand the importance of policy decisions. We understand the importance of policy reforms. But parallelly, we must also look for practical solutions which will make a difference. Now, I represent one of the most marginalized communities in Sri Lanka. And representing one of the most marginalized communities, which has 30% access to education, 40% access to healthcare, it's quite saddening to see that we are not able to make that difference that we crave for. So I'm very pleased to hear Axel's take on the evolution roadmap as well. If I may just end this by saying that we also try to focus on practical issues such as reusing and recycling of water. So earlier, an average family of 4 in Sri Lanka would consume about 20 units of water, which is about 20,000 liters of water. Now, after we increased the water tariff,
Yeah.
they've understood the value of water, and it has come down to 13.5 units of water. So, yeah.
Minister, thank you very much. I think it's a really powerful opening.
Thank you.
But as you speak about all the various things that have happened in Sri Lanka, you're giving us a sense of all the variables that need to be considered in the equation: strong institutions, a regulatory framework, credibility, creating space for the private sector, the policy reforms, and an openness to collaboration in terms of the public-private partnerships that you speak about. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me then to build on that and go to Madame Mahajan, who joins us online. Madam, we've already heard a little bit of the Indian case study from Professor Kramer. We know that India has seen incredible success in terms of delivering piped water supply and sanitation, reaching about 114 million households in just the last 5 years. My question to you is, what are the few lessons learned that you could highlight today, especially as you consider how you attained this level of scale?
Thank you very much for that question. And let me begin by just giving a little bit of the context. So India, as you know, is a large country with a large population, but with about 18% of the world's population, we have just about 4% of the freshwater resources of the world. And there are large variations within the country, with climate change and its impact on spatial and temporal variations in rainfall just exacerbating the situation. So a growing population and a growing economy is a recipe for water stress. On the one hand, while we are working on improving the productivity, the water productivity, particularly in agriculture, on the other hand, for decades together, we've been making efforts to bring drinking water to our people. And now, as Professor Kramer pointed out, a massive ambition to bring to each of the 900 million people in the country and about 190 million families water at their doorsteps, water in adequate quantity, of the right quality, and in a reliable and sustainable manner. That's the ambition, no less, for the Jal Jeevan mission. And there's a similar ambition for urban India as well. By now, we have been able to provide potable water to 76% plus of our rural households. And in all the remaining, the work is going on even as we speak. And this ties in with the huge efforts made for safe sanitation. So as many of you know, there was in 2014 a very ambitious effort to make the country open defecation free. By 2019, the 600,000 odd villages in the country had declared that they had done so, but we continue to work towards ensuring sustainability. And so to address your question and very quickly, to come to what I believe are the key insights that we gained in this process. I think first and foremost, this task is a humongous task, and especially when we talk of rural parts of countries and working in distant locations. I believe political leadership is crucial. Political leadership at the national level, but also at the provincial and local body levels, because these tasks, the water and sanitation tasks, are usually best handled at local levels. Public resources, we believe, are also crucial. The kind of resources that are required for achieving these, but more importantly, the nature of the economic activity per se. While in some urban centers, public-private funding is a possibility and should be explored, but certainly in rural parts, we believe there has to be a substantial public funding. In India, for instance, we've anticipated that the requirement for rural India would be of the order of about US $80 billion. Over 30 billion have already been spent. We expect to spend the rest in the next 2 to 3 years. So funding is crucial, but also partnerships. Partnerships right. In a whole of government, whole of society approach, partnerships with not just international organizations, academia, but also local civil society organizations, skilling centers across the board. Partnerships are crucial to achieving success in this stupendous task. And we have to make use of innovations. There's a huge opportunity now in new technologies, whether they're IoT-based devices or efforts at inline chlorination, such as Professor Michael Kramer, the one that Professor Michael Kramer just mentioned. So we do have to bring in all the innovations that we can bear. I believe the role of women is really critical. Women, as was just stated, do bear the burden to a very large extent for both water and sanitation in the families. Women should not just be the recipients of these developmental efforts. Ideally, they should be leaders, but at the very least, they should be partners. And we have seen that where women self-help groups, for instance, have been handed over O&M responsibilities, they've really done well. So I believe that's another very important takeaway that we at least have experienced. And finally, these activities cannot be seen as infrastructure provisioning, whether by government or private sector. We believe that without very robust community engagement, we may not be able to sustain these services. And so what we've been looking at is community engagement, starting from the planning, the implementation, but most importantly, O&M to ensure sustainability in financial terms through user charges, etc., and sustainability of the water to make sure that the communities use the water wisely and these facilities can really continue to remain available. And I will stop with this.
Madam Secretary, thank you very much. I think, again, it's really bringing color to the picture that had been started to be painted by Professor Kramer: political leadership, public resources, partnerships, a whole of government and a whole of society approach, innovation, a gender lens that puts women at the center, and not forgetting that we start with the community. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for that. Let me come back into the room and come to Minister Urhi, and let's go to the Tunisian example. You have recently, as Tunisia, Tunisia developed a very comprehensive water plan called Water Plan 2050. And the aim of this plan is to look at growing water insecurity, increasing supply, but also managing the demand of water. Where I'm going with this is to look at the corresponding investment, which comes at a substantial amount of about $1 billion per year. Minister, the question to you is, through which avenues does the government envision to mobilize these financial resources? And what are the strategies that you're thinking about to begin to attract private sector participation to reach these funds?
Merci d'abord, merci beaucoup. Je vais m'exprimer en français. D'abord, laissez-moi vous dire merci pour l'organisation d'un tel événement très important pour nous et très important pour notre région en général. Laissez-moi exprimer mes vifs remerciements d'abord à la Banque mondiale pour son engagement continu et ses actions ciblées et pertinentes en faveur du développement durable et de la valorisation des ressources naturelles à travers le monde et notamment en Tunisie. Laissez-moi saisir cette occasion pour mettre à la lumière deux défis majeurs auxquels la Tunisie fait face aujourd'hui et qui risquent de compromettre le développement et la relance économique en Tunisie. Premier défi, c'est la raréfaction accrue des ressources en eau et le risque lié au changement climatique. La Tunisie fait face à un stress hydrique chronique depuis des années. Les ressources en eau douce de notre pays deviennent de plus en plus menacées par des épisodes de sécheresse et de chaleur extrême, par la pollution et la surexploitation, notamment urbaine. Parmi les chiffres qui en témoignent, l'indicateur de disponibilité en eau renouvelable, qui est actuellement au moins de 359 mètres carrés par habitant par an en Tunisie, alors que le seuil de stress hydrique à l'échelle mondiale se situe à 500 mètres au cube par habitant et par an. Tenant compte de ce grand défi, le gouvernement tunisien a mis en place une stratégie nationale pour le secteur de l'eau, intégrant les ressources en eau conventionnelles et non conventionnelles afin d'assurer la sécurité hydrique. Parmi les objectifs de cette stratégie, je cite l'augmentation de taux de mobilisation des ressources en eau de surface à 95%. Le renforcement de la capacité de stockage des barrages et leur protection contre les dépôts sédimentaires. L'adduction des excédents d'eau pendant les périodes de pointe vers des zones les plus arides. La promotion de l'utilisation des ressources en eau non conventionnelles et la désalinisation des eaux. L'augmentation de la capacité de traitement des eaux usées de 972 000 mètres cubes jour en 2022 environ à 1084 000 mètres cubes jour en 2025. L'augmentation des pourcentages d'eau traitée utilisée en irrigation agricole pour atteindre 17% de la quantité totale des eaux usées traitées à la fin de 2025 contre uniquement 12,2% en 2022. L'amélioration de la proportion d'eau traitée répond au cahier de charges de rejet au milieu naturel de 74% en 2022 à 80% en 2025. L'augmentation de la capacité d'exploitation des réseaux d'assainissement par le secteur privé de 23% actuellement à 35% en 2025. En plus du défi de l'eau, les répercussions de changement climatique ont frappé de plein fouet la Tunisie à travers des phénomènes météorologiques extrêmes, allant des inondations à des vagues de sécheresse prolongées, avec des conséquences profondes sur l'écosystème naturel, sur le développement économique et sur la résilience sociale. Ces phénomènes extrêmes risquent de compromettre le progrès économique, de faire exaspérer les inégalités entre les régions des pays et de fragiliser davantage les couches sociales les plus vulnérables. Pour atténuer ces effets, l'État tunisien s'est engagé à mobiliser les financements adéquats pour soutenir des projets innovants et durables dans le domaine de la gestion de l'eau et de l'adaptation au changement climatique, promouvoir le partenariat entre le gouvernement et le secteur privé, de la société civile et les institutions internationales pour partager les connaissances, les meilleures pratiques et les solutions efficaces à ces défis. Intégrer les considérations liées à l'eau et au changement climatique dans les politiques nationales de développement. Que dans les stratégies sectorielles, notamment la stratégie de l'agriculture à l'horizon de 2050, qui repose sur une utilisation durable de ressources naturelles avec une meilleure capacité d'adaptation au changement climatique. Le gouvernement tunisien a mis en place la vision Tunisie 2035 avec un axe stratégique dédié à l'économie verte et au changement climatique. La déclinaison à moyen terme de cette vision est véhiculée par le plan de développement pour l'année 2023-2025 qui a prévu une enveloppe d'investissement à peu près de 2000 millions d'euros pour cet axe, dont une enveloppe de à peu près 1500 millions d'euros pour le financement du secteur de l'eau. Donc, cet investissement, je serai très rapide, sensibiliser le public sur l'importance de la conservation de l'eau, l'efficacité énergétique et la réduction des gaz à effet de serre. Donc, investir dans la recherche et développement aussi, les technologies innovantes, propres, développer les ressources en eau non conventionnelles telles que les stations de dessalement, on investit beaucoup là-dessus. Les eaux traitées aussi, il y a beaucoup d'investissements là-dessus, environ 300 mobilisés, qui permettent de mobiliser à peu près 350 millions de mètres cubes d'eau chaque année. Encourager les pratiques agricoles durables, préserver la biodiversité. Donc, c'est une responsabilité collective de prendre des mesures audacieuses et innovantes pour garantir un approvisionnement en eau sûr, durable, équitable pour tous, tout en réduisant les émissions de gaz à effet de serre et en favorisant une transition vers les économies vertes résilientes à travers le monde.
Minister, thank you very much. It's a very comprehensive response, and thank you very much for taking through the detail, which includes some of the targets that are part of the plan, but also how you're going to raise the funds. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to go back online and invite Minister Kamara from Mali, who's also joined us in this conversation. Minister, I hope you can hear us. And my question to you, thank you very much. We do see you in the room. The question to you is that we know that Mali is implementing programs.
Oui, nous sommes là.
So what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, while we is that the comeback is the room, go to Madame, and then we'll come back to Minister. Minister, we'll come back to you while we sort out the technical problem. Madame van Ginneken, maybe let me come to you. As a special envoy, you have a very unique position because you have a global overview of some of the most pressing water challenges facing countries around the world. The question to you is, which of these challenges keep you up at night? First part. And I know the list could be long, so if we can maybe keep it to the one that keeps you most up at night. And the second part of the question is, what encourages you and gives you hope, especially as you begin to look at some of the innovative financing solutions that are beginning to surface?
Thank you very much. Climate mitigation is CO2 and climate adaptation is H2O. Climate adaptation is all about water and water resources management, because let's face it, ordinary people experience climate change through water because your home flood, because your harvest fails and you can't feed your kid. So if water is the problem, water needs to be the solution, needs to be the engine of climate adaptation, the engine of climate resilience. And we see three priorities in this. First is technology and engineering and infrastructure. And as water professionals, we like building things. I'm a civil engineer by training, and I see that also in many of the interventions here. But I think we need to realize that just technology and engineering are not going to help us in a changing world. So there's two more priorities. First of all, we need to protect and restore our freshwater storage in nature. 99% of storage of fresh water is in nature. So there's a lot of discussion about large dams, but it's really our wetlands, our lakes, our aquifers, and also what we call green water, the water in the soil, which is our biggest buffer against drought and against floods. And 35% of wetlands were lost in the past 40 years. We need to restore that. And then the third one, and this actually keeps me up at night, is that we need to make water and soil guiding principles in our economic planning and our spatial planning. And that's difficult because it's outside of our sector. I saw Richard Damania there. His detox development report estimates $635 billion per year in agricultural subsidies, which actually push us in the wrong direction, towards overexploitation of groundwater, towards pollution, towards deforestation. We need to repurpose those subsidies so they work with us. And we need to realize that with climate change, because of water scarcity or because of salinity, because of the risk of flooding, not all economic activities are possible everywhere anymore. Hence, water needs to be crucial in spatial planning. You cannot build houses in flood-prone areas. You cannot build big data centers in the desert and probably even give a subsidy to build those big data centers in the desert. You cannot keep growing cotton in the desert. And I think that change, which is outside of our sector, is what keeps me up at night, because it's more difficult. It's politically difficult. It's a question of justice, how you devise these kind of rules and these kind of subsidies. And we need to get out of our water bubble. What gives me hope is that we've done a lot of good things. We heard about Swachh Bharat in India, where 600 million people got sanitation. We know we've reduced child mortality because of that. We know we're better at managing our water. So we have the tools, but we really need to come together and especially think about what's the role of water in spatial planning and economic development because of climate adaptation, and to be honest, also because of our human activity and our economic growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madame. We need to get out of our water bubble. I think it's such a powerful statement that you've given us. But as you speak about the opportunity and the challenge sits for you as you see it in spatial planning. And that's certainly a part of the conversation that I think needs a lot more spotlight. I'm going to try one more time with Minister Kamara just to get her voice in before we close up on this panel. Minister, welcome back. We can see you on the screen, and I hope that you can hear me. The question, Minister, is we know that Mali is implementing programs.
Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour, madame. Bonjour, madame.
Bonjour. Voilà, je vais parler en français. Hein. Voilà.
Madame, I'm just going to allow you to make your intervention, and I'll be quiet so that we can hear you.
Est-ce que vous... Ah, ça se coupe automatiquement. Nous avons des problèmes là. Oui, je disais bonjour. Est-ce que vous entendez?
Madame, please proceed.
Oui, vous m'entendez là?
Oui.
Vous m'entendez?
Oui.
Voilà, OK. Alors, je voulais d'abord remercier la Banque mondiale pour l'appui au niveau du Mali. Et maintenant, je voulais juste aller vite parce qu'on a des problèmes de connexion. La problématique au niveau du Mali, c'est que les ressources en eau restent très sensibles aux effets du changement climatique. D'une part, ce changement climatique affecte de façon notoire les arbitrages d'allocation des ressources en eau pour la production d'énergie électrique au niveau des barrages, mais aussi pour la production risicole au niveau de l'Office du riz du Niger, de l'Office du riz du Ségou et de l'Office riz Mopti. L'approvisionnement en eau potable des populations riveraines et les agences de développement. D'autre part, le changement climatique, conjugué aux effets anthropiques, engendre une forte turbidité des eaux de surface, ce qui induit des coûts additionnels dans le traitement des eaux de surface. Enfin, le changement climatique affecte la prédictibilité de l'utilisation des eaux souterraines, Plusieurs forages réalisés ne produisent plus les quantités d'eau attendues et parfois ne produisent pas du tout. Ça s'est réalisé dans un cas, dans une localité au sud du Mali, où la Banque mondiale, le projet de la Banque mondiale a financé des forages et 1 an, 2 ans après, il n'y a plus d'eau au niveau de ces forages. Cela a amené le gouvernement à mettre en place la commission de gestion des eaux de Séléngué et du barrage de Markala, afin de garantir un partage équitable des ressources en eau de barrage de Séléngué au profit de l'ensemble des usagers situés à l'aval de Séléngué et de Markala. La question de la sécurité de l'eau ne doit pas se limiter seulement à ces 2 points, elle doit être généralisée à l'ensemble du territoire malien. Et nous comptons sur les partenaires du Mali pour nous aider dans cet agenda. Plus globalement, le gouvernement s'est engagé dans la mise en place d'une approche de gestion intégrée de la ressource en eau, appelée GIR, qui permet d'impliquer l'ensemble des acteurs dans la protection et le partage de la ressource. Les réformes proposées. La réforme de l'hydraulique urbaine a été un déclencheur pour avoir une plateforme des bailleurs de fonds de Kabbalah sous le leadership du ministère en charge de l'eau. L'élaboration des documents de politique et de stratégies programmes a été inclusive avec l'implication de tous les acteurs. Il y a encore des efforts à consentir pour une meilleure résilience du Mali, à combiner les ressources en eau et les services d'approvisionnement en eau et de l'assainissement. Quelles sont les perspectives? Le nouveau projet en préparation avec la Banque mondiale, intitulé Projet d'appui à la sécurité de l'eau au Mali, est attendu pour aider le Mali à combiner la maîtrise des ressources en eau et le développement des services d'approvisionnement en eau qui dépendent de ces ressources. Les leçons tirées du programme précédent renforcent la nécessité d'une approche résiliente intégrée pour le Mali dans un contexte de dégradation de la ressource en eau et d'interdépendance avec les pays voisins représentés dans les organisations des bassins frontaliers telles que l'OMVS, l'Organisation du fleuve Sénégal, l'ABN, Autorité du bassin du Niger ou bien la Volta. Voilà, je vous remercie. C'est ce que je veux dire dans un premier temps. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Madame. Thank you so much. We do appreciate those comments. And of course, as Minister also outlines, the importance of doing more, building on what's been done, but putting sanitation front and center in terms of what still needs to be done. Ladies and gentlemen, it does get us to the end of this very first panel. As we've indicated, it is quite tight, but I think we got some really robust and important insights. Can I ask you to join me in a round of applause as we give them all a round of applause? Thank you very much. We're doing a very quick transition, ladies and gentlemen, into the second and final panel for the day. I'm going to acknowledge in her absence and knowing that she will hopefully join us, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is the co-chair of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water and will join us a bit later. The EU Commissioner for International Partnerships, Madame Jutta Urpilainen, is here with us and joins us in the room. Let's give Madame a round of applause. Thank you very much. And I see that Mr. Thierry Dio, the founding partner and CEO of Meridian, has joined us on the stage. Also, let's give him a round of applause. There's quite a big applause in the front for you, Thierry, so we're looking forward to your comments. Also on the stage is Madame Stacey Purcell, Senior Managing Director for Asset Management at the Ontario's Teachers Pension Plan. Thank you very much, Stacey, for being here. Let's give Stacey a round of applause. And last but not least, joining us online is the Mayor of Cape Town, joining us from South Africa, Mr. Jordan Hill Lewis. Mayor, thank you so much for making it. Madame Urpilainen, let me start off by coming to you first with the question. One of the things that we are becoming increasingly aware of is that we need to do better at leveraging existing, but as well as new financing that is coming in from the public sector as well as the private sector, if we are going to get water secure and if we are going to meet our climate resilience goals. The question to you, Commissioner, is how is the EU's global gateway using guarantees, using blended financing to unlock some of these investments?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to participate in this very important discussion on behalf of the European Union. So indeed, from droughts to floods, the sea level rise, I think the impact of climate change on water security grows clearer every day. And I think when I was preparing myself for this event, one statistic in particular conveys the severity of this crisis. Approximately half of the world population experiences severe water scarcity.
Sure.
And that's really a striking fact. So the reality is, unless we act decisively, the water crisis will worsen. And our efforts to conserve water lag 10 to 15 years behind our clean energy efforts. So what we must do is that we must accelerate efforts to deliver water services at scale in a financially sustainable way. And I have to say that I really commend the World Bank's ambitions with its new Global Challenges program on water security as a concrete deliverable of its playbook. So really, congratulations for that. Then when it comes to the EU, at the EU level, in the context of this Global Gateway strategy, which is our global investment strategy, we approved 4 water-oriented financial guarantees amounting to 460 million euros. And this is in turn will generate up to 1.4 billion euros in investments. You might know that Global Gateway is our investment strategy focusing on energy, transport, digital, health, education, and research. And this UNCDF Blue Peace Bonds initiative in the Gambia River, I think is actually a great example of how states, the private sector, and also development banks can join forces to deliver at scale. But this needs, of course, very strong political leadership, sound financial management, and common planning in a transparent manner. So through these investments, the EU will improve access to drinking water and sanitation for 70 million men, women, and children. And of course, our investments are not just economic. The EU is also working at the political level to promote access to safe drinking water and sanitation as a fundamental human right. For us, it's not only economic issue, it's also issue of human rights. So the EU remains fully committed to achieving a water resilient and secure world by 2050. This is our common goal. We are committed to that. And indeed, we need to encourage also private companies and private sector to invest more in this field. And that's why we need also innovative finance. And for us, this is the part of the Global Gateway.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I think as you open us with that opening statement, I think you've set the tone for this conversation, because it really is about looking beyond the economic imperative, and it really is about partnering with purpose. I'm also aware that you are on a very tight schedule and might need to depart. So if we could maybe give the Commissioner a round of applause as she leaves the stage as well. Thank you very much. I'm going to continue with the conversation, and when you're ready, Commissioner, you're more than welcome to descend the stage. Allow me then to maybe come closer, Mr. Dio, and start off with you. And to build on a little bit of what we've heard the commissioner sharing with us. We know that your organization, Meridium, is one of the leading infrastructure investors in emerging markets and also in low-income countries, and in particular with the focus in some of these countries investing in the water sector. What I'm interested in hearing from you, Mr. Dio, is what are the risks that you are seeing coming out of these markets in particular? And what would you like to see as a private investor, governments do, in order to begin to reduce those risks? Because we've been talking about crowding in private sector capital since we started this conversation this morning.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. The list would be quite long, so I'll try to make it short. But clearly, I mean, I think for private investors like ourselves to come, the risk that is perceived can be fairly high, despite the reality of it not always be so high. Also because I think we have to see water in a context of usually being provided at the municipality level, which is a bit of a sub-sovereign risk that investors in emerging markets are not necessarily used to. That increases the complexity. And I think I want to bounce back also with the fact that once we said, okay, we'll promote public-private partnership, we need to de-risk and blend money, the things have become a lot more difficult when it comes to water. I mean, investors are seeking sustainable financial returns, but that will not be possible without sort of sustainable provision and management of water and the real impact on the population, the economy, the industry. And that has been made quite difficult with climate change, because today, as our former speaker here has just said, we have to get out of the water bubble. The water is no longer manageable just from the municipal level to provide drinking water to people, because there is a real issue about the management and the sustainability of the resource, the fair sharing of that resource. Most countries are going through droughts. So the need for new technologies, desalination, and many things coming into this make the complexity of that delivery a lot more difficult to achieve. So it's very important to see water from the resource management all the way to the delivery to the ultimate communities. And that chain is no longer just controllable by municipalities, but it needs central governments and many other people to be able to manage that. So two things in terms of blending. When I think about de-risking and blending, and I'll pass the usual contractual frameworks and all these things, I think the bank group, the World Bank Group, does that very well in terms of policy advocacy to many places. It's really about blending both financing, but also blending skills and resources. Delivery of water, as I said, has become more complex. So being able to bring the right technology at the right time, at the right moment, is quite important. And this is where also private sector can contribute, not just with money. And the blending side, on the financing side, I think we've now have all the tools. And I commend Commissioner Jupilainen, because the Global Gateway have been really focusing on this particular topic. It's really about, and every case is special. Yeah. But it's really about having all the tools necessary to address exactly the risks that are perceived or real in a particular investment. So that goes with the guarantee schemes, that also goes with concessional funding, but also with just longer term funding that usually available that is usually available in those countries. Because there's also a fundamental piece in the equation when you talk about delivering water to community, is the affordability, which is the piece that is usually the last piece that people try to solve to, but it's quite fundamental. If water is not easily accessible and affordable, then it's not a sustainable process that you're going through. So solving all this has become a lot more complex. So investors need to engage at so many levels today that it requires them different kind of resources and different kind of approaches, because you are engaging with communities, with a number of different stakeholders, including the MDBs, governments, and others, to be able to achieve that.
Mr. Dio, thank you very much. And as you talk about bringing affordability front and center, I think one of the things we can take out of some of the risks that you've spoken about is rethinking the water value chain, as you've said, and where we locate it, and beginning to realize that this sits beyond the municipal level. And I think we're going to build on that. But you've given us one investment view from a private sector example. I want to maybe bring in Madame Purcell, because you would also give us an institutional investors view, because we know that organizations like your pensioners fund would really take a very long-term view when you're thinking about which sectors to invest in, when you're thinking about which markets to invest in. Perhaps, Madame Purcell, you can unpack for us what was the driving force behind OTPP's decision to invest in the Chilean water and sanitation sector, and what did you look for in order to bolster your confidence in making that decision?
All right, let me invite you into the head of an institutional investor.
Yes.
And I'll walk you through us investing in Chile, which we did in 2007. For those of you that don't know, Teachers owns over 90% of the equity in 4 companies that serve just over a third of the population of Chile. So we're a very major player in an emerging, although trending towards developed market. I mean, as an investor and a long-term investor, we're looking to invest, we're looking to make a return, and we're looking for what level of certainty we think we have around that. And there's sort of a hierarchy that we would work through. For Chile, first we had to determine if we thought the country was an investable for us. And a big part of that is stability and trajectory. So, you know, we looked at Chile, we saw political centrality and high stability in government. We saw strong institutions. We saw a credit rating, a good credit rating. We saw low levels of corruption. We also saw potential for growth, which was very positive for us. So I would say we're not investing in the water sector unless we can first get comfortable with the country. The next layer that we looked at was, what does the infrastructure sector in Chile look like? We look to write big checks. If we're going to invest the time in considering a country, we want to know that potentially we have the ability to deploy large amounts and in different sectors. And when we looked at Chile, which is frankly a relatively small sized country, we saw that it had a very outsized investment opportunity set in infrastructure. There was privatization across almost all sectors. There was water, there was energy, there was gas, there was telecom, there was roads. So we're like, this warrants our attention. And there was also a high level of privatization. There was a high level of foreign investment that we saw in the country already. That then brings us to the water sector.
Yeah.
And the things that we liked about the water sector there, first was we liked the regulation. We liked that there was a federal regulator. We liked that there was a track record, that the regulation had been in place and been tested for, I mean, at least a decade or more before we got there. And we saw that the regulations seemed to be working. Chile was trying to build out its sewage treatment. This required massive amounts of investment. Investment means tariffs go up.
Right.
And that's actually what we saw in Chile, is that tariffs were going up to compensate investors for these large investments in sewage treatment. We also saw that the regulators seemed to have balanced objectives of managing the customer's bill, but also had real ambitions and wanted to improve quality of service. And that comes with investment. One other small, well, maybe not small, but for us in the regulation and the tariffs, we saw inflation protection, which for us was important from a benchmark perspective. And then you get to the company. So when we looked at the water sector, we actually said, who can we invest here?
Yeah.
Are the investments big enough? Can we get the right level of control? And are they at the right stage of maturity? We invested in Chile in 2007, which was, almost a decade really into this huge investment program into sewage treatment. It was also close to a decade after they started the privatization. Were we the right party to be there when the privatization first happened? No. Were we the right party to be there at the beginning of this giant build out? No. We didn't. We know, we don't have the capabilities or we didn't have the time to transform the companies like that. We came in at a later stage when they were more mature and more de-risked. If I was to look back, so I worked on those acquisitions. It's been quite a ride. If I was to say in hindsight, what are two things that we kind of missed or I wish we had gotten right better? One is water utilities eat CapEx. So if you're planning a big, and I know a lot of countries here have ambitions, you need to think about what will happen if it costs twice as much to achieve your goals.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the country? What does it mean for bills? What does it mean for investors? Because you need to be prepared for that to work. And then I think the other one is the impact of climate change has been huge in Chile. And one of our companies is Ground Zero. At the end of the month, this month, our major reservoirs serving 1 million customers are essentially going to be empty.
Oh.
And that means that agriculture in that area is getting 100% of their water supply cut off. Now, we've been planning for this for years. We've been investing tens of millions of dollars to make sure we have water security, but the farmers aren't going to be happy. And it's a risk for us. It's a risk for the country. And of course, it's a risk for the population, which if these things don't work out, there's going to be water rationing. So it's a complex industry, but just so important. And we realize that from a health perspective, and it's like water is life.
Yeah.
Is the motto of one of our companies. So anyways.
Madame Purcell, thank you. I think I loved how you opened that response with an invitation to go into the mind of an institutional investor. And that's exactly what you've done as you've unpacked the different considerations that bolster the confidence of making that investment. And thank you for highlighting many of these variables. I want to build on that a little bit because you speak about Ground Zero. And I know that Mayor Hill-Lewis, you've had to confront Day Zero in Cape Town. We know that you managed a Day Zero situation in 2017 where the city was bracing to be completely run out of water by then. Can you tell us a little bit about, one, how did the city manage the crisis, Mr. Mayor, especially how the management led Cape Town to becoming one of the most resilient water resilient cities globally today. And maybe you could also just comment on what are your future plans to bring in more private partnerships to further bolster some of that resilience?
Ndiabulela Nozipo, thank you. It's great to speak to everyone there. Can you just give me an indication that I'm audible in the room?
Ndiabulela, I can hear you.
Excellent, thank you. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and fellow panelists. I really loved Mrs. Purcell's comment that water utilities eat capex, because I'm discovering that firsthand here in Cape Town after our drought. And that's why we have to be creative about how we finance that capex, because we cannot finance it ourselves. If we do finance it all of ourselves, It just means that it eats all of our capex capacity to fund all of the roads and sewer networks and piping and so on that we have to do, public transport and so on. So just as you said, Nozipho, we had the 1 in 400 year drought between the 4 years of 2015 and 2018. We had 4 years of terrible drought, and we came within about 60 days of what we called day zero, which is the day in which Cape Town would have to actually switch off the reticulated water supply and resort to water rationing, where people would have to go to centralized water collection points. We didn't ever actually hit day zero, but we came perilously close. And really the only way that we got through it was by I think, world record beating reduction in water usage from the city residents. It really was, in the end, an incredible time of very powerful unity as the city's 4.5 million residents at the time came together and were determined to win in this campaign that we called defeating day zero. And part of that success in getting that absolutely unanimous public buy-in was firstly introducing the concept of day zero. We made this targets day that actually had a date on the calendar marked in red, and we made it a citywide effort to push that date further and further out, and it became almost in a way gamified as we all celebrated that we've pushed it out by another 2 days, or we've pushed it out by another 1 day. And the city also got tough with water abusers. We actually published the names of the top 20 water users in the city every week, so that we got social pressure to push down water usage. There were significant price adjustments to properly price for scarcity. We got all of our electronic billboards around the city on all of the highways, talking constantly, publishing a day zero message. And so all of these things work together to really get unanimous public buy-in for this mission to defeat day zero. And in the end, we did it. But we knew that we could not rely on that in the future, even though some of those very healthy water habits have remained with Cape Townians. There has been a general, much deeper respect for water after the drought, and many of us still continue those healthier habits today. But we also said there has to be an investment in water security, a major investment. We can't be susceptible to future droughts like this ever again. So we did put a lot of effort into researching and publishing a report called Our Shared Water Future, which is available online. If you just Google it on our City of Cape Town website, it's a great document which sets out our investments over the coming decade or so to deliver water security for the city. And really they revolve around, first, water reuse. We are at a little bit later this year, around August, September, starting the procurement process for a major water reuse plant, and that is going to be a public-private partnership that will be hopefully funded entirely by the private sector in the way that has been described by your earlier speakers. And then closer towards the end of the decade, a significantly sized desalination plant as well to build water resilience. And the idea is that by 2030, by the end of the decade, we will be able to supply 350 megaliters, 350 million liters a day, which is roughly a third of our city's requirement. At the moment, we're actually using less than that, as I said, because some of those healthy habits have remained. But it's roughly a third, a little bit more than a third of our daily requirements in the city, and that will make us much more resilient if what we suspect that the permanent drying and reduction in rainfall in Cape Town continues. But those two projects, a massive utility-scale water reuse plant and a utility-scale desalination plant, are two extremely expensive projects, and they cannot be funded by the city alone. We have launched a small green bond, I think one of the only municipalities or cities in South Africa to launch a green bond, which has been very successful. And so there is some innovative and blended finance that we can bring to these projects. but we still believe that private sector investment into importantly, following what Mrs. Purcell has said, revenue generating projects like desalination plants and water reuse plants, that they be funded more and more by global climate investors. There's just one last thing that I'd like to say, that we are also very keen to explore subnational lending from international finance institutions, and this very often, more often than not, these subnational loans require sovereign guarantees, which in many jurisdictions, including in South Africa, the sovereign treasury is unwilling to offer. And so I really would like to prompt participants, particularly bank participants, to explore how we can get around the requirement for sovereign guarantees for subnational lending, and to invite all of you to sunny Cape Town to be a part of our shared water future journey. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Mayor Hill-Lewis. You are getting a round of applause here in the room in Washington. Thank you for highlighting some of the innovative instruments from green bonds to subnational lending, but also for highlighting the role and importance of conscientizing the citizens and making sure that they are part of the solution and the attraction, I would imagine, Madame Purcell, to investors as well. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala, thank you very much for joining us, and we really appreciate your time. We understand your busy schedule, and you've just made it in the nick of time for the conversation. I have just one question for you, and that is, can you just share with us some of the thinking and some of the emerging messaging that is coming out of the Global Commission on the economics of water, especially as it relates to trade and raising finance?
Thank you very much. I actually have prepared remarks that will summarize this. If you'll allow me to take just a few minutes. Can I do that?
Go ahead, Dr.
Sorry, I apologize. I was at the IMFC meeting. Understood. And rushed in from there, and I was told I could join you at the end. So if you don't mind, I'll do that, because that will make a nice window into what we're doing in the commission. So this commission, the Global Commission for the Economics of Water, of which I'm one of the 4 co-chairs, was set up in 2022 with the support of the Netherlands, with a mandate to redefine the way we value and govern water for the common good. 2 years ago, we issued an initial report that defined the policy challenges we're dealing with. We looked at the emerging science of green water held in soil and of atmospheric rivers that transport immense amounts of water vapor across long distances, both of which fall outside traditional water governance frameworks, and that consider water as a local resource. And I feel a bit bereft because I haven't been here to follow how that conversation you had has gone. And we made the case for a new economics of water, emphasizing the tools economics can provide to deliver on what I call the 3 E's, or we're calling the 3 E's: efficiency, equity, and environmental sustainability. So the Commission is now focused on delivering its final report at the Warm Water Summit that will be held later this year with the UN General Assembly. And it will spell out how incentives and other core economics tools can help manage limited water resources more effectively, whilst simultaneously ensuring greater access to water for underserved communities. We'll also highlight the need for new strategies, finance structures, and improved governance frameworks to meeting the water challenge, including a mission-oriented approach to galvanize action. Inadequate water policies distort virtual water trade patterns, incentivize maladaptation to climate change, and result in underinvestment in the water sector. I know that many people may know this or they may not know that it takes 12 liters of water to grow a single almond. But 80% of the world's almonds are grown in the arid state of California. And it's not an isolated example because of inadequate water policies, growing and exporting water-intensive crops from arid regions is regrettably common. And this is where, of course, the virtual water trade you talked about with my hat as the DG WTO is very interesting to us. Yeah. What can we do about this? And water is often seen as a right, but providing water for free sends an economic signal that water is abundant, even when in reality it may be scarce. This price signal incentivizes farmers to switch to more water-intensive crops if we don't have any price on water, such as rice, sugarcane, and cotton, exacerbating vulnerability to water scarcity and drought instead of promoting growth and poverty reduction. And because water infrastructure is typically long-lived and expensive, private capital and market forces cannot be relied upon on their own to deliver an optimal level of water infrastructure. So even in a time of fiscal restraint, we will need the public sector to play a role in creating the enabling conditions for investment. So let me say that inaction, if we do not act on this front that I've said, pricing water, investing in water, it will be costly. And we have actually Richard Damania, I don't know if you're still in the room, who is doing a lot of work on the commission on these issues. It will be costly. More inefficient cities unable to support growth will be part of it. Food supplies at risk. More inefficient virtual trade, water trade, forest loss impacting atmospheric rivers, greater vulnerability of poor communities to adverse trends and extreme events. And that's just the start. So we have to act. And one of the things, and this will be my last point, there are many ways to act, but you gave me only a couple of minutes. One of the things that we're really thinking about to change this misallocation of water resources, to make sure we get the economics of water right, to relieve or release money for investment in the water infrastructure that will be needed, is repurposing existing subsidies to water and agriculture. And you all know, this is a mantra, the OECD has estimated $630 billion each year for support to agricultural producers. Most of this support is trade distorting. So why are we doing it? We have about $300 to $400 billion in subsidies to the water sector. Much of it encourages the wrong sort of use. These are just two. I could go on with other types of subsidies. But if we are looking to revalue water, if we are looking for resources to invest in water infrastructure, this is one of the areas we can start with. So let me stop there because I'm taking too long, but it's to give you an idea of some of the areas and issues that the Water Commission is looking at. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam. And I do think it deserves a round of applause. And what it does is that it allows us to move beyond just talking about the problem and gives us a very practical pointer of where we can focus to unlock action. And thank you for elevating the 3 E's. I think they'll be standing out as one of the things we'll take away: efficiency, equity, and environmental sustainability. I think many of us in the room as well will think twice now as we have almonds, and we'll think about the 12 liters of water per almond that we take. Thank you very much, Madam. Ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the tail end, but there is just one more thing where I'd like to do. I'm going to invite my panelists to take their seats back in the front, just so that we can invite Sir Nick Stern to come and just give us his reflective comments. And Dr. Ngozi, I think you will appreciate this because he's been listening right from the beginning and is going to just share with us what he's heard and play back some of that so that as we walk out of the room today, we walk out with clarity about the so what and the now what. And that's what gets us to action. So let's give our panelists a big round of applause. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sir Nixon. Again, not needing an introduction, suffice for me to say, of course, that Sir Stern is IG Patel Professor of Economics and Government. He's the chairman of the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the Environment. And one last thing, if I may mention, is he is the head of the India Observatory at the London School of Economics. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to all those who spoke. I'm going to try to do this in 3-4 minutes, if I can. We heard first of the scale of the problem and correspondingly the benefits of action. This is all about development in all its dimensions, whether it's the growth of the economy, the incomes of the poorest people, health, agriculture, and so on. It's a huge problem. I'm not going to rehearse the numbers, but correspondingly, the benefits of action are very strong. And actually, these are areas where there are very high economic and social returns to investment. We heard about the providing, conserving, and storing of water and the many ways to get it wrong, and that there are some ways to get it right. And we did hear of success stories of very different kinds, you know, from India on big scale to Cape Town saving itself, the innovation in Tunisia and so on, all sorts of ways of moving forward. So this you can manage, but you've got to learn from the mistakes. And this kind of event helps us to understand the successes and understand the mistakes. Mistakes, a lot of it around terrible use of water and great waste of water, and that people are responsive to community discussions and values. Also, they're responsible to prices, and they're responsive to prices, and that's important too. The subnational and cross-border elements in all this, we're going from one to the other, are very important. And being able to lend to municipalities is critical, but of course municipalities can't borrow unless they've got decent sources of revenue. So it's not simply, oh, well, we'll just lend. You've got to create the revenue bases at the same time. And the way in which you price across all these things matters to their viability. Cross-border issues, of course, everywhere on this. I think it was half the big rivers of the world cross borders. Here it seems to me that multilateral institutions have a very big role to play, and looking to someone who's trying to help solve the problem in terms of investment and not just, as it were, allocation, I think is very important to the World Bank. A particular example here. Our friend from the Netherlands said, get out of the water bubble. I mean, this is a whole economy problem. We know that. It's agriculture, it's energy, it's the urban structures, the way we run our towns. So some of this has to go up to a level of the government that's capable of looking across the whole economy. Usually that's the finance ministries and the prime ministers and presidents' offices, and it has to be handled there because of the way it spreads out. It doesn't mean you close down water ministries. It means that the other ministries have to react and interact in ways that recognize and take account of this problem. The storage in nature is of huge importance, and Ngozi emphasized it. Many others did too. And we've been getting that badly wrong, you know, in destroying our hillsides, destroying our water sources, you know, straightening out rivers when we should be letting them wind about. There's so many issues around that I think we're starting to gain that consciousness. But again, it affects the whole of land management. It's not just a water issue. Finally, well, penultimately, the whole issue of private investment and managing risk. Private investors need risk return. And so you have to understand risk, you have to reduce risk, you have to manage risk. And of course, track records matter a great deal. But you know, things have to start somewhere. You can't always invest in somewhere which has already sorted out most of the regulation issues. But there are big regulation issues around private sector investment. Just look at the UK. You've got huge examples of how to get it wrong. And one of the reasons they got it wrong was to simply just look at the price regulation and not look at the whole quality supply investment structure. So this is difficult regulation, but it's very important that it carries the full breadth of, price, quality, structures, and so on, and particularly of investment, because it really is. The eats capex, I thought, was actually in this context it should be drinks capex. So finally, I wanted to emphasize, as many people did, overlaying all of this, of course, is climate change, and it is making life much, much more difficult. With the floods and the destruction that it brings, it destroys infrastructure resources, and it particularly destroys water infrastructure resources. We heard about desertification and the already from Mali and Niger and Volta and so on, the kind of tensions that can bring across borders. So we have to find ways of tackling this problem which bring development, mitigation, and adaptation together, and in ways which drive our water management, water supply, water quality, and indeed sanitation forward. So I had a very rich task here, just sort of thinking and listening. But I think the productivity of this gathering is really very high, and I'm sure our friends in the World Bank will be distilling it all for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sir Nick Stern. Ladies and gentlemen, that does bring us to the end of what I think has been, I hope to Axel's invitation, a provocative conversation, but an important conversation. He started off by reminding us of what's at stake, and I just want to repeat it as we grab our bags and leave the room. It's economic progress, it's poverty alleviation, it's violence and fragility. That's what this conversation is about. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. And to all of those who joined us online, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.